Hello, I'm glad you joined us today with the continued study of the Gospel of Mark. Today we begin in chapter 3 and verse 7, just right after Jesus has healed the man with a withered hand and upset his enemies again, and they have teamed up with the Herodians to seek how they might destroy him. In chapter 3 and verse 7 it says, Jesus withdrew to the sea with his disciples, and a great multitude from Galilee followed, also from Judea and from Idumea and beyond the Jordan, and from the vicinity of Tyre and Sidon, and a great multitude heard all that he was doing, and they came to him. And he told his disciples that a boat should stand ready for him because of the multitude, in order that they might not crowd him. For he had healed many, with the result that all who had afflictions pressed around him in order that they might touch him. And whenever unclean spirits beheld him, they would fall down before him and cry out, saying, "You're the Son of God." And he earnestly warned them not to make him known. Jesus' public ministry began with an immediate and intense popularity, and yet we also see this dark background of the hatred of his enemies, the scribes and Pharisees, with their envy, and wouldn't accept his teaching or what his miracles pointed to, and that was the fact that he was the Son of God. They were especially disturbed when he claimed to forgive sins and healed a man who was a paralytic to show that he had that power. It was intensified when he associated with sinners. And even more so, now Jesus and his disciples act contrary to the things that they had bound concerning the Sabbath law with their traditions. And Jesus and his disciples didn't cater to their way of thinking. And now the restoration of this man with a withered hand, again on the Sabbath, showing himself to be the Lord of the Sabbath. He is the Son of Man, a messianic term referring to the one who was to come, the chosen one of God. And but their envy, their hatred for him would not allow them to accept this, and all they can do is scheme to destroy him. So here in chapter 3 and verse 7, Jesus withdraws from Capernaum for a while, and he goes about his ministry on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Great multitudes of people are following Jesus, and for a time we forget about the enemies because Mark centers around this eager, excited crowd that throngs to Jesus. And he not only emphasizes the size of the crowds, but he shows from the great expanse of where they have come from. They're coming from all over Palestine, not just in the region around the Sea of Galilee, which is a large area, but besides Galilee, they're coming from the southernmost parts of Palestine. They're coming from Judea and Jerusalem and Idumea to the south, and from the eastern side of the Jordan over in Perea, the Phoenician sea coast. People are coming from the northwest, from Tyre and Sidon. Jesus was the sensation. He was the idol. He was the popular person of the hour, more than I think that we can imagine. All these multitudes of people were coming from everywhere, no doubt coming for many reasons. All kinds of people. Some people, I'm sure, were coming just for curiosity. They wanted to see what was going on. What's the big stir? Who is this guy? What's he saying? What's he doing? Maybe we could see a miracle. Then there were people who were truly looking to be healed. They'd heard of the cures, and they had come and they were pressing around him in order that they might just even touch him in order that they'd be healed. He tells his disciples to have this boat ready. Jesus, because of this great crowd, was in danger of being crushed. Everybody just pressing around him, and so and didn't allow him to be able to do what he needed to do in his teaching. And so he asked them to have this boat ready as he might escape being pressed against. Mark especially points out the demonics. They're especially pitiful. People possessed by these demons wouldn't have any choice but to fall down when they would fall down before the Son of God. And they would cry out through them, "You are the Son of God." But it says he warned the demons not to make him known. The time hadn't come for him to be plainly said to be the Son of God. Time would come for that, but it's not yet. And these were not the beings to proclaim his divine person and his work. Here's a picture of his ministry, though. The crowds, the activity, the mighty message, the mighty works, the limitless power of the Son of Man. And I think it's kind of a reflection of what we see today in the world. Countless people, multitudes of people in this world. And yet some are just curiosity seekers. Some really are not interested in truth. They're just kind of curious. So many who are ignorant of the truth, and yet they're spiritually diseased, many in bondage and many in distress spiritually. But there's many who are looking and longing and seeking, looking for healing. And Jesus is there, sympathetic, ready to heal, power to save. And it's our responsibility to point them in the way. Mark chapter 3 and verse 13, it says then that he went up on a mountain and summoned those who he himself wanted, and they came to him. And he appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to be able to cast out demons. And he appointed 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, and James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas and James and son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus and Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Here Jesus chooses 12 companions, official companions, whom he calls apostles. He goes up on a mountain to do this. Other passages tells us that he went and prayed all night before making this choice. He goes on this mountain, he calls these men, chooses them as apostles. The word apostle simply means one sent forth. And these are men whom he is going to teach and train, and he's going to send them into the world to do his work and to preach his message. And with this increasing popularity, it'd be necessary for him to have assistance in his work of teaching and healing. And in time, his ministry would come for them to take over as he would leave. His ministry is going to be brief. Himself, he would go to the cross. And so it was necessary for him to teach and to train these men who would eventually found and establish his church and carry his message into the world. So therefore, these men are going to receive special instruction, and they're going to be sent out with a special message, and they're going to receive special powers to confirm their word, and they're going to be special representatives of Jesus, chosen by him and sent forth by him. They are apostles, those sent forth. And it says in verse 14, he appointed the 12 that they might be with him, so that they can learn these things and be taught and trained, and that he might send them out to preach, it says. And he gives them authority over the demons. They would know that all the power of earth and hell could not defeat them if they would be followers of the Lord. And this is important for them to learn now, if they would be sent out on this great and most important mission. And I think this is important for us today. Though we are not privileged to be with Jesus personally, we are with Jesus, and Jesus is with us through his word, and we have his promises, and he tells us that he'll be with us, and he'll help us, and he'll guide us and protect us if we'll serve him. And we can know that he's on our side, and that we have victory even over Satan and over death. That in his kingdom, which the powers of Hades, the power of death couldn't keep him from establishing it, and those who are in the kingdom will not be overcome by it either. But he chooses these 12, and I want us to consider why he chose these 12. Just think about these men. There's a lot more that we'd like to know about these men. God has chosen to reveal what he has. Some of them we don't know much more about them than their name. You can read all kinds of things about tradition. May be true, may not be true. I'm for sticking with what the Bible says. If God wanted us to know everything about them, I'd like to know more about Peter's family. I'd like to know more about these men that we know only their name. But what we do know about them tells us a lot. But when you first look at them, and the men that he chose, you might ask, well, why did he choose these men? For example, you'll notice Jesus didn't choose men from among the nobles. He didn't choose them from among the aristocrats. He didn't choose from among the priests of the temple or the religious leaders of the day, the highly educated doctors and rabbis. That's not whom he chose. These were common men. They were men of moderate ability. They were in no way dumb. They were not illiterate. They were called unlearned and ignorant by the rulers in Jerusalem, and that simply meant they received no technical education in the sacred law. But they were men who loved God, and they were men who were able. They were men who were used to work. They had businesses. They were able to deal with finances. They had various backgrounds and various characters. Some of them seem to be opposites as far as their background. And some of the background of these men would cause immediate prejudice against Jesus, and because he was associating with them. As we've already seen with Matthew, or Levi, the tax gatherer. Who did he choose? It says he chose Simon Peter. He was a fisherman, along with his brother Andrew. Honest work, hard work, common work. You remember back, it says that they were there on the Sea of Galilee, and they dropped their nets to follow Jesus. And possibly Philip too. John chapter 1 and verse 44 tells us that Philip was from Bethsaida, place, we said the name of that means house of fish. Possibly that he could have been a fisherman as well. But Peter was a married man. He had a family. Remember his mother-in-law, whom Jesus healed earlier in this gospel. These were common people with common jobs. They were country people, would have been considered that by many. They talked different than other people. They had an accent, evidently. The people in Jerusalem could tell that they were from the country of Galilee. Remember Matthew 26 and verse 73, the little girl came up to Peter and said, surely you're one of them too. The way you talk gives it away. Peter was an individual who was quick to speak, sometimes of little faith. He acknowledged that he was a sinful man in Luke 5 and verse 8. But Jesus chose him. And Matthew, we've already despised and looked down upon by the Jewish people as a crook and a traitor because he was a tax gatherer. In their eyes, you had prostitutes and sinners and tax gatherers. And they took up taxes for the Roman government, and many of the tax gatherers were corrupt, and whether you were or not, you were grouped with those kinds of people. So even if you were an honest tax gatherer, you were hated mostly by the Jews in general. Then you had Simon the Zealot. Each time it lists the apostles, it points out that Simon was Simon the Zealot. It says that he was a member of an active, aggressive, militant party, despised by the Romans, and they despised the Romans. They were a fierce party that claimed to have strict attachment to the law of Moses, and acknowledged they had no king but God. And so they didn't like the Romans, and the Romans didn't like them. And it makes you wonder how Matthew and Simon first sized one another up, one working for the Roman government, the other being a zealot against the Roman government. But Jesus chose both of these men. It shows you that the people of God can have different backgrounds, and what overrides that is their allegiance and discipleship to Jesus. You can imagine Jesus walking down the street with this crew. No matter where he goes, somebody's going to be pointing and bad-mouthing him because of the company he keeps. The Romans going to look and see this zealot, and the Jews going to look. They're going to see people like Matthew, the tax gatherer, and then there's just going to be the religious people who's going to be looking at these unlearned fishermen, and why would you choose such a bunch? He chooses James and John. They too are just fishermen. They were partners with Philip, or with Peter and Andrew in the fishing business. Luke 5 points that out. And then these brothers evidently were hot-tempered. This sons of thunder is what this word that Jesus gave them, this bonerges. Sons of thunder. And the reason you can see this, you go back to Luke chapter 9 and verse 54, and they were passing through going back and forth from Galilee to Judea, and they passed through the Samaritans region, and Samaritans didn't have anything to do with the Jews and vice versa. They didn't have anywhere that they could stay, and it angered them. And they said, "Lord, you want us to call down fire from heaven and destroy these people, consume them?" Hot-tempered. Yet Jesus, after spending all night in prayer on the mountain, chooses these men. Why did he choose them? Well, I'll tell you why. It's all he had. These were the best of those that he could choose from. He chose the ones that he had. And yes, they were flawed. All men are flawed. We're all sinners. We all have our faults. And these men were chosen as apostles, one to be with him, and one whom he would send forth to do his work, and he was going to accomplish his work through them. And how? Well, not because of their power, but because of his power. Jesus didn't choose them because of what they were, but by what they could become through him. He didn't choose them because they were great and mighty, but because of what they become and how mighty they could become through his power. He chose them because of their heart, because of their willingness to change and to be changed in what he desired. They might not have been much when he chose them, but because of their heart, except for one who would harbor sin in his heart and was unwilling to change that, he would end up betraying Jesus and destroying himself. There's a great lesson in that. You know, we claim to follow Jesus. We've got to be willing to change, and we can do great things not because of who we are, but because of the power that God has to work within us. But if we claim to try to follow Jesus, and I think Judas, he left everything just like the rest of them. He had intentions of changing and doing and following, and yet he harbored this greed, this materialism in his heart, and it caused him to betray the Lord. You try to follow Jesus and you hold on, you harbor sin in your life, you'll end up destroyed. You'll end up betraying your Lord. You can't serve Jesus and not give you all. You got to take up your cross daily. Deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and follow Jesus. Here's Simon. He's called Peter by the Lord, which means rock. When Jesus chose Peter, he was a long way from being a rock. But that's what he would become. He was fickle, vacillating many times, but later he would be the rock who would go and preach and teach, and evidently giving his life later. James and John, the sons of thunder. Well, James would be the first to die for his faith in the Lord. And John, this other son of thunder, would change, and we look at 1 John, and that epistle that he wrote is known as the Epistle of Love. Why does Jesus call who he does? Well, many are called, few are chosen. Not that he wouldn't choose and have all to come, but not everybody's willing to change. We've got to be willing to be what he'd want us to be. But he chooses those whom he does because they're willing to submit to his will and realize that we are not great, but it is he that is great and who can work through us. You know, 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 26 says, "For consider your calling, brethren. There were not many mighty, not many according to the flesh, not many noble." That's not what Jesus was looking for. He's looking for common people who will have good hearts to serve him and to realize what he can do through them, what we can become through him. Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 20, Now to him who is able to do exceedingly and abundantly beyond all that we ask or think, according to the power that works within us. I think that's what we see when we look at this choosing of the apostles. It's what, not who these men were when he called them, but what they would become through his power, that they might be with him, that he might train them to eventually go into all the world. And now we have that responsibility of going to all the world and preaching the gospel to every creature. Important things to think about. Our time's gone. Until next time, we'll pick up there again in Mark chapter 3. I hope you have a good day.